We gaan verder met... ik denk van nou, quiescent letters werd net even gezegd van... is misschien wel nog wel goed om dat een keer te herhalen. Dus bij deze gaan we dat even herhalen. Toch een goed idee? Quiescent letters, dat zijn de letters die hun klinker kwijtraken. Maar wel in de zin blijven staan. Ben je er klaar voor?
Quiescent letters. What is quiescence? Quiescence effectively means to become silent. In our context here, what we're talking about are consonants that cease to function as consonants. They become silent, and they tend to blend with the previous vowel. Now there are 4 consonants in Hebrew that can do this. He, Yud, Vav, and Aleph. Now, have we seen these consonants before as a group, or at least some of them? These ones here should look familiar to you. These are our matrix lectiones. If you remember, back to our vowel chart, we had these at the top. He was associated with the A vowels, IE with, or Yud with the IE vowels, and Vav with the OU vowels. And these are the consonants that were used, sometimes as consonants, and sometimes to mark vowels. When they are used as vowels, they're called maters or matrix lectiones. Now, it's not surprising then that these are the ones that can quiesce. They can cease to function as a consonant and blend with the previous vowel.
Oké, laat ik even zien. Hold shift. Share to. Zien jullie er nou 2? Of 1? Zien jullie nou eentje? Welke zien jullie?
De simplified chart.
Oké. Ja, dat is ook de bedoeling. Nou, hier zie je die letters, hè? De he, de Yud en de Vav. En die werden genoemd de matres lectiones. En die konden dus een onderliggende letter dragen. Dus dan had je een kamets en dan een he. Of een tsere en een Yud. Nou, dat kun je zo doorgaan. Dus dit zijn de 4 letters. En nou zegt hij dus dat de alef dus ook bij machten is om een matres lectiones te zijn. Oftewel een moederletter. Die dus altijd lang is. Nou, kijken of ik weer terug kan. Oh, en dat deed uit. Hoe kom ik nou terug? Oh. Nou, gaat niet meer goed. Dus niet de pen, ben ik dit keer. We gaan verder.
Now what about Aleph? Aleph actually can also be a mater. We didn't talk about that before, and it's not that common, but in a word like Shena, which means to sleep, the Aleph here is functioning vocalically, together with our comets, as a vowel. So Aleph too can function as a mater, which is consistent with what we have here with these ones. Now let's look at an English example of quiescence. These consonants will tend to quiesce at the end of a syllable, not at the beginning. And we see that also in English. If you look at the word table, and we look at the word depot, in table we have a T at the beginning of a word, and it's functioning as a consonant. We hear the sound T. In depot, it has become silent, and it's at the end of a word, and therefore the end of a syllable. Depot, we don't say depot. So we have similar behavior in English. Now let's take a look at a Hebrew example. First, let me write up this word, Yisrael, which we've used. Oops, I spelled that wrong. Let's get it right here. Yis starts with Hidik. Yis, Ra, Yisrael. Okay, so we have Yisrael. And what I want to look at here is Aleph. Here we have Aleph at the beginning of a syllable, and it is functioning as a consonant. It's holding the position of a consonant. This is a CVC syllable. Now let's look at another word, Yish. Yish, Ma, El, and this has an ayin in it, and then an Aleph, and then a Lamed. So Yish, Ma'el, Ishmael. Now, if we look at this last consonant here, it looks kind of funny, or this last syllable. We have a C, V, C, C. C, V, C, C. Well, what kind of syllable is that in Hebrew? We don't have that. And the reason it looks like CVC, but it's not, because this one here is the Aleph, and the Aleph is quiescent, so it's not functioning as a consonant there. Now, you can often tell a quiescent Aleph because it won't have a vowel under it. Notice this one has a vowel under it, this one doesn't. So if you see an Aleph without a vowel under it, particularly if it's in the middle, or it appears to be in the middle of a syllable, or sometimes at the end, then you probably have a quiescent Aleph. Let's take a look at another example. This is Reshit. Oops. Re. Reshit. Reshit means beginning. The first word in the Bible is Bereshit, which is put B in front of this, in the beginning. Reshit, the syllable is here, syllable division, and here we have a quiescent Aleph at the end, and it has no vowel under it. So Aleph will quiesce, and you can tell because it doesn't have the vowel. Now,
dus wat voor soort lettergreep is dat dan, de eerste lettergreep?
CV?
Ja. Dat is correct. Dit is CV en dat betekent geen accent, dat de V lang is. De klinker is lang. Nou, dat klopt ook, want het is een serre. Ja? Dat zie je. En het is dus niet C, V, C. Deze alef is niet een consonant, niet een medeklinker, het is een quiescent. Het is een quiescent letter. En omdat die quiescent is, staat hij wel in het woord, maar hij geldt niet als een medeklinker. Niet als een consonant in het Engels. Dus het is ook niet dat dit een klinker is. Een alef, een serre alef of zo. Snap je wat ik bedoel te zeggen? Ik heb geen reactie, dus het zal wel goed zijn.
At the beginning of a consonant, at the beginning of a syllable, it's a consonant. At the end of a syllable is where it quiesces. What will often happen is there'll be a change in a word that will cause an aleph to move from the beginning to the end, and then quiesce. And this happens frequently when you add an inseparable preposition. If you have a word, just imagine this is our word, and we have aleph at the beginning. If we add a l, b, or k, what will sometimes happen is this l will steal this first letter as part of its syllable, and so now this letter finds itself at the end of a syllable. Without the l, it was at the beginning. And so when you put l or b or k on a word beginning with aleph, the aleph may well quiesce because now it finds itself at the end of a syllable. Let's look at an example. Now I need a lot of space here, so I'm going to write at the top Elohim is the word I want here. God. Elo. And actually I'm going to copy this, so we need it 4 times. See if we can fit it on this page. 2, 3, 4. It's a little squished, but okay. What happens if we add an inseparable preposition like le on here? Well, the first thing we have to do is we notice here we have 2 shavas at the beginning of a word. And when we have that, we need to apply our rule of shava. So by way of review, we had 2 rules of shava. One was where we have 2 simple shavas at the beginning of a word. And when we have that, the first shava becomes a hidduch, and the second one goes silent. If we have a compound shava, like a chataf sagol and a regular shava, then what happens, you remember? This one, the first shava, becomes the short vowel that corresponds to the compound shava. So in this case, sagol. So this one changes to sagol, and the second one stays. So let's apply our rule of shava. Put our le there again, and this becomes sagol. So le Elohim becomes le Elohim. So our step here is rule of shava. Now, what happens is this finds itself now at the end of a syllable, and in this case it quiesces. So let's repeat our le here, and let's erase. If it quiesces, it loses its vowel. So we'll erase it. So this step is quiescence. Quiescence of the aleph. Now, what often happens with aleph, as opposed to the other quiescent letters, is that when aleph quiesces, you will frequently get, or often get, compensatory lengthening. So, what that means is, let me erase this here. It's already quiesced, so we've lost that. We've lost a vowel, so it makes things shorter, so this is going to lengthen now to compensate. Try and keep the same overall length. And if you're going to lengthen a sagol, what are you going to get? It's going to lengthen its family. Remember our vowel chart? We had sagol, and above it we had tsere. So, this is going to become a tsere. So this here is compensatory lengthening. Now, these are all the steps that happen that explain what a person would do naturally if they were speaking. Le Elohim is harder to say than Lelohim. But what we have here is a rule of shava, we have quiescence, then we have compensatory lengthening. Okay, now it doesn't always happen. Aleph will not.
Je zou eigenlijk verwachten dat hij niet zou zeggen le Elohim, maar lelohim. Omdat de e-klank lang wordt. Dus we beginnen met een hele korte e-klank, le dan wordt het lelohim en dan wordt het le Elohim en dan wordt het lelohim. Dus, want van le ga je naar le. Mijn gevoel zegt dus, maar ik weet niet of ik dat correct heb, dat het dus lelohim is en niet lelohim. Omdat je een lange e-klank hebt, het tsere. Ik weet niet of ik dat helemaal goed zeg, maar dat zegt mijn gevoel. Is er iemand die dat kan bevestigen? Of ben ik de enige? Klinkt toch logisch? Ja.
Dat is een lange E, dat heeft hij zelf ook net gezegd. Dus,
ja.
Daar moet het echt worden.
We doen niet altijd zoals het hoort, hè? Dat doet hij ook niet.
Nee. Maar daarom, dat maakt hem wel grappig.
Always quiet.
Ja.
Let me look at a very similar example, but a case where it does not quiesce. And this is the word, all these little dashes, Edom. You have the very same beginning. Edom means Edom. Okay, make sure I spelled that right. Edom. If we add L on there. We're going to do the same step we did before. Let me rewrite this here. Edom. So we need to apply the rule of Shava because we have two Shavas at the beginning of a word. So as before, this will become Sagol, but then it stops. Le Edom. That's how you say it. This does not quiesce. So Aleph does not always quiesce. And the purpose of this module is not to try and explain the rules for when it quiesces, but rather to explain what's happening so that you can recognize it when you see it. Now let's take a look at one of the other letters. Similar behavior with the Yud. And we'll look at the word Yehuda. Yehuda. Judah. And let me copy this one as well. I think we only need this 3 times. 2, 3. And let us add our inseparable preposition as before. So we're adding an inseparable preposition. So we have to apply the rule of Shava. In this case, we apply the first rule because we have 2 simple Shavas. So the first one becomes a Hiddik and the second one becomes silent. Le Yehuda becomes Li Yehuda, or something like that. I don't know how you would pronounce that. Li Yehuda, perhaps. But the Yud now quiesces. So this is rule of Shava. And as with the Aleph now, the Yud finds itself at the end of a syllable. Here it was at the beginning before we added this. Now it's at the end. Yud can quiesce. In fact, it does. It loses its consonantal value and starts to function. It functions as a vowel. So let's put this down. Let's erase our, where's the erase? E. We'll erase our Shava under the Yud, and now we have Lihuda. So this is quiescence. And we don't have any compensatory lengthening as we did with the Aleph. So now we have Hiddik Yud. Before we just had Hiddik. And the Yud now is part of the vowel, Hiddik Yud, as opposed to functioning as a consonant, which it was with the word by itself, Yehuda. So there's an example of quiescence with the letter Yud. Now Aleph will quiesce.
En dat is de vraag. Wat was het laatste wat hij zei? Hoorde u dat? Even terug.
Dat hij zei dat het
And the
over
Yud now is
die Yud.
Ja, even terug.
quiescence. And we don't have any compensatory lengthening as we did with the Aleph. So now we have Hiddik Yud. Before we just had Hiddik. And
Hiddik Yud is niet quiescent. Hiddik Yud is een consonant, is een vowel.
Ja,
Het is
vreemd.
dus als het een quiescent is, dan is het dus lamet, hiddik en de Yud is quiescent.
Ja, maar dat zegt hij niet.
Nee, hij zegt hiddik Yud. Dus is het niet een quiescent letter.
Ja.
Dan is het een matres lectionis. Oftewel een moederletter.
Ja.
Dat was
Ja.
zijn vragen die ik heb. Dat misschien de vorige keer ook gesteld, maar dat weet ik niet.
Ja.
Yud now is part of the vowel, Hiddik Yud, as opposed to functioning as a consonant, which it was with the word by itself, Yehuda. So there's an example of quiescence with the letter Yud. Now Aleph will quiesce more frequently than Yud and Vav. There are more examples of Yud and Vav at the end of a word where it's not quiescing. For example, the word dai, which means enough, or goy. How do you spell goy? Goy, nation. There we have a Yud at the end, and it's functioning as a consonant. Or tzav. There you have a Vav at the end, functioning as a consonant. Tzav means command. The Hebrew alphabet. It's the word to command in the imperative form. So you're telling someone, command these other people to do whatever. Command. So, by way of review, we have 4 consonants, He, Yud, Vav, and Aleph, that can function as, or can lose their consonantal value. They can quiesce, they can cease to function as consonants, they'll blend with the previous vowel, And this tends to happen at the end of syllables. And with aleph, you will also sometimes get quiescent or compensatory lengthening. It will lose its vowel underneath it, and the vowel before it will lengthen.
Oké. Op die 2 vragen na, zijn er nog andere vragen die boven komen drijven? Nee?
Nee.
Oké. Nou, dan gaan we naar de volgende share. 602. Gutturals en Raish, deel 2. Die gaan naar beneden.
Gutturals and Raish, Part 2. We had a module earlier called Gutturals and Raish, and there we introduced the gutturals and mentioned that they can affect vowels around them, change vowels around them. And we also said that Raish is part of the gutturals because it has some behaviors that are similar to the gutturals. But that's about all we said. So now I'd like to tell you what those behaviors are. So, by way of review, first of all, what are the gutturals again? We have aleph, ayin, chet, and hey. Those are our gutturals. And then we also include Raish together with them. Now, the first point, we'll have 3 points here. The first one is to talk about which vowels or what vowels they like, what vowels they tend to be associated with. The ayin, the chet, and the hey, together with the Raish, so basically all of them except for the aleph, they tend to like a vowels. So we have our kamets, patach, chataf patach. Now remember, this one is related to the short O, not the A, so forget about that one. So these ones like the A vowels. Aleph, on the other hand, will often have an E vowel. So the sagol or the chataf sagol, the compound shava associated with sagol. Now why is this? These are the gutturals that are pronounceable. Chet and hey we know how to pronounce, Raish we know how to pronounce. Ayin is actually pronounceable. It's a consonant way back in the throat. And so consonants that are pronounced in the back of the throat will tend to have vowels pronounced at the back of the mouth associated with them because it's easier to transition from an A vowel to these gutturals and Raish than it is to transition from a vowel that's pronounced at the beginning of the mouth, like an E, for instance. So these are the pronounceable gutturals, and so they have a tendency to change vowels to A vowels. Aleph, on the other hand, really isn't pronounceable, or if you do pronounce it, you pronounce it as a glottal stop, a stoppage of breath, and so it doesn't have the same tendency to pull vowels to the back of the mouth like these ones do. And in fact, it tends to take an E vowel. So this is because it's not really pronounceable, unlike these ones. So that's the first point. They tend to take A vowels except for aleph, which takes an E vowel. The second point is that none of them double. So no doubling. No doubling. And that applies to all of them. All the gutturals and Raish. None of them can double. The third point is a reminder. We already talked about this earlier, and that is that the gutturals take composite shava. So aleph, ayin, chet, and hey will take a composite shava or compound shava rather than a simple shava. So if you have a word, you have one of these there, and you expect to see a simple shava, just put a compound shava in instead. Now, which one? Well, that depends, but it won't be a simple shava. Resh, on the other hand, this is where Resh is a little different than the gutturals. It can take a simple Shava. Simple Shava. So, the characteristics of gutturals and Resh are that they tend to take A vowels, except for Aleph, which likes E vowels, eh? There's no doubling, none of them can double, and this will have consequences. When you have a word that normally doubles in a certain place, if there's a guttural or Resh there, then it won't double and you'll get other things that happen instead of it, or potentially. And thirdly, they will take a composite Shava, the gutturals that is, while Resh can take a simple Shava.
Ik was gemute. Zijn hier vragen over? Redelijk simpel, hè? Oké. Gaan we naar de volgende. Gaan we de berg in. We gaan mijnen.
The coal mine letters. We just talked about gutturals and Resh, and one of the properties of gutturals and Resh that we noted was that they don't double. They cannot take a dagesh forte. Well, the coal mine letters are some other letters that, under certain circumstances, also cannot double, or do not double. So let me give you the letters here. Coal mine is the mnemonic. So let's write it down. Coal mine. Oops. Coal mine. Okay. Now what we're concerned with here are the consonants. So the kof, vav, lamed, mem, yud, and nun. What the rule says is this. If you have one of these letters, let's take the yud as an example, and it has a vocal shava after it. So it's followed by a vocal shava, or vocal shava is sitting under it. If for some other reason you expect this yud to be doubled, sometimes you will find it doubled. In other words, you'll have the dagesh forte there, and sometimes you won't. This rule doesn't predict when you'll find it with or without. It simply says that these ones have a tendency to drop their dagesh forte if they're followed by a vocal shava. Now this rule is covered in Juan Maroka, or is discussed there, a Grammar of Biblical Hebrew on page 83, and they give a bit of a reason. They say that no doubt this happens because in some cases there was a disinclination to make a long consonant depend on such a weak vowel. In other words, if you double one of these here, why these consonants in particular, I don't know, but if you double one of these, you get a long consonantal part, and here you have a very short vowel, the shortest of all vowels. And what they're saying is sometimes this vowel simply isn't enough to carry this, and so it'll sometimes drop. Be that as it may, what we're concerned with here is just remember this rule. It'll come in handy. If you remember the word or the mnemonic coal mine, you'll know that these letters can drop their dagesh forte when followed by a vocal shava.
Nou, dat is de regel. Nu krijg je volgens mij die ingewikkelde les. Waarin al die dingen bij elkaar komen. Even zien. Is dat deze? Ja, ik denk dat het deze is. Dus brace yourself.
Article before weak letters. This module will look at what happens when we attach the article to words that begin with letters that cannot double. If you remember, our article has three parts. We have the consonant, hey, the vowel, which is a patach, and following that we have the doubling of the next consonant, or the gemination of the next consonant. So this is a dagesh forte. Remember, three parts. This is the part that people tend to forget. But what happens if the letter that's sitting here, the first letter of your word, can't double? Then other things need to happen. And we've seen two groups of letters that do that. One is gutturals and resh, and the other are the coal mine letters. Now, the rules for attaching articles to weak letters are complicated. At least I find them a bit of a mess. And I've tried to simplify this as much as possible. The best way I could think of doing this was simply to put it all into one chart, and we'll go through it. So it'll look a bit intimidating at first, but we'll walk through it. So here's our chart. Now, let me talk you through this. Note first of all how this chart works. On the left here we have the four types of things that happen. In some cases the dagesh will simply be omitted. In other cases we'll have what we call implied doubling or virtual doubling. In other words, we're going to say, okay, we don't see any doubling, but we're going to pretend it's happening for a reason. Another is compensatory lengthening. This is where the vowel that precedes the guttural changes, it lengthens to compensate for the fact we don't have doubling. We've seen this before. We saw this in the case of quiescent aleph. If aleph loses its vowel, effectively making the word shorter, then the vowel previous to it will tend to lengthen. It'll lengthen to compensate. And finally, there's something called harmonization, where the vowel under the first root letter will harmonize with the vowel under the article. So, the four categories of things that can happen. Now, in the first one here, we notice we have a yud and a mem. This is what happens with a couple of the coal mine letters. The rest of these all concern gutturals and resh. And okay, so why don't we jump right into the chart here and look at the first section. So dagesh is omitted in the case of a mem or a yud. Now these are only two of the coal mine letters. It doesn't happen to all the coal mine letters, but the mem and the yud, remember those are part of the coal mine mnemonic. If they're followed by a vocal shava, they will drop the dagesh, no dagesh present. The vowel under the article stays the same. This is normal, ha, with the patach. And here's an example. Yiladim means children, and it starts with a yud. You put the article on it, the hey, and the patach. We would expect the yud to be doubled, but in fact it doesn't. Now, there is an exception to this rule. The exception is that if these, the yud and the mem, are followed by two of the gutturals, the ayin and the hey, then in fact the dagesh will stay. Again, the vowel is normal, so there's no change there. So here we had hayiladim, or hailadim, I suppose I should say that, where the dagesh is no longer there in the yud. However, Yehudim, Jews, the dagesh is there, if you can see that. And that's because this yud is followed by hey, following this exception here. So, dagesh is omitted with two of the coal mine letters, except for this exception, where it stays. Let's look at the gutturals and resh. Now, the gutturals and resh can be divided into two groups, or gutturals can be divided into two groups. The hey and the chet are called your strong gutturals. They're ones you pronounce. The aleph and the ayin are you either don't pronounce them that strongly, or they aren't pronounced at all. The ayin can be pronounced, but is a weak guttural, considered a weak guttural in comparison to these. And resh is grouped there. Now, what happens with the strong gutturals? The strong gutturals, you don't get gemination, you don't get doubling, which is the case for all these here. The only case where you actually have doubling here is this exception to the coal mine rule. Okay, so otherwise what we're dealing with here are cases where you don't have doubling. So it'll be no all the way down this column. No dagesh present. Now in the case of the hey and the chet, there's no change to the vowel either. So heichal, which means temple or palace, you add the article and it's just ha-heichal. Or chochmah, which is wisdom, you add the article and it's just ha-chochmah. You don't have any change to the vowel and you don't have the dagesh. So why do they call this implied doubling? They call this implied doubling, while in this case it's dagesh omitted. What's the difference? It looks the same, doesn't it? What's going on is this. In this case, you have a vocal schwa under your yud, your first root vowel. Here you have some other type of vowel. When you have a vocal schwa and you add the article takes that yud and makes it a closed syllable. So now this yud is part of the closed syllable. So you have CVC, CVC, a closed syllable, with a short vowel, and that's permitted. In this case, you have a consonant and a vowel, and that's it. This doesn't take this as its next consonant to make a closed syllable. You have an open syllable. And the open syllable, CV, has a short vowel.
Begrijpen jullie wat er gaande is? Het heeft te maken hier met deze letter, de schwa. En hier staat een kamets. Een schwa kan silent worden en is een syllable marker. En dat klopt ook, want dan krijg je, als je dit zo ziet, oh, streepje. Kleurtje veranderen. Nee, dat kleurtje zal niet werken, denk ik. Die. Hier is je syllable division. Dat betekent dat deze schwa aan het einde van je syllable staat en dus silent is. Terwijl in dit woord, ma, krijg je, als ik dat wat groter maak, ik weet niet of ik dat even wil uitvegen. Even schrijven weer. Wat je hier ziet is dat hier de syllable division is en hier. Want dit is ook een silent schwa. Deze. Misschien moet ik hem geel maken, want anders zie je hem niet. Deze schwa is silent. Dus je hebt hier syllable division en hier. En daarom krijg je dus implied doubling. Het is als het ware ma. Het is dus geen verdubbeling. Het wordt dus niet he, get, kaf. Maar het wordt dus he, get, kaf. Ik weet niet of ik het nou ingewikkelder heb gemaakt. Maar ik probeerde uit te leggen dat die implied doubling te maken heeft met dat in het ene woord er dus een schwa staat, terwijl er in het andere woord een kamet staat. En daardoor wordt het niet het einde van een lettergreep. Uitvegen. Ja, dat wordt een O, ja. Chogma wordt het. De kamet. Deze kamet wordt een, weet zo'n ding nou? Als het een O is. Kamet schatoef, ja, volgens mij. Even spieken. Kamet schatoef. Ja. Oké.
If you remember back to our rules of syllabification, CV unstressed should have a long vowel. In this case, it has a short vowel up here. The patak stays. And that's a short vowel, and that's not permitted. So what they say is, okay, we don't see a dagesh there, but really there is doubling happening, we just don't mark it. So I suppose you could say this is a CVC with an implied C there, final C. So that's why they call this implied doubling or virtual doubling, while this is just dagesh omitted. Let me get rid of this other thing here. Okay, so strong gutturals produce implied doubling. Weak gutturals produce compensatory lengthening. Again, you can't double them, but what you get is a lengthening of the vowel that precedes it. So with ish, for instance, meaning man, you have ha'ish, where the ha, the patach, changes to a kametz. There's no doubling here, and so it lengthens there. Similarly, ir, which means city, changes to ha'ir with the kametz rather than the patach. The patach, like this, lengthens to a kametz. And here's an example with reish, regel, meaning foot. Again, you have the kametz there. So, compensatory lengthening. Now, in both these cases, the strong and the weak gutturals, you have an exception. Exception conditions are here. For the strong ones, if you have a patach, if you have a kametz following these, or a chataf kametz, you get he. And that sounds quite different. He harim, the mountains, as opposed to haharim. He chacham, the wisdom, the wise man. This was the wisdom. He chodashim, the months. And down here, if you have a kametz under the ayin, just the ayin, you also get the same exception. It goes to he, so you have he'avim, the clouds. Now, the exceptions here occur with kametz, when kametz is under the guttural. In these two cases, and also here, and here you have a chataf kametz. And it produces the same exception. So note this here. There are conditions where you'll get he, which sounds quite different than ha. Finally, there's something called harmonization. Harmonization happens with an accented, when the first letter of the word is an accented ha or a. So a he with a kametz or an ayin with a kametz. And what happens then is that, let's look at some examples here. The vowel under the first root letter, in this case the aleph, will harmonize to match the vowel under the article. Now what I suggest here is simply just to memorize these four words and note that harmonization can happen. So eretz becomes haaretz, the land. Har, hahar, where they're both kametzes. In all these cases, they're both kametz. Ha'am, the people. Ha'avel, the iniquity. And this will tend to happen for words that are either monosyllabic or have the accent on the first syllable, because part of the requirement here is that the first letter be accented. So, what do you do with all this? What I would do is this. There's a lot of information here. I would keep a chart like this handy. A chart like this is available. And when you encounter them, glance at the chart to refresh yourself as to what category you're dealing with. Note that with these two coal mine letters and the gutturals and reish, you won't get doubling, with one little exception. Note that the vowel can change. He is the most prominent. It'll look quite different. It'll sound quite different. Ha will look different, but probably not sound different because you say it the same as these. And so note that the article can have he and ha. That's why I've colored these here. They're different. Be familiar with these categories. Dagesh can be omitted. You can have implied doubling, which means that it's omitted, but we're going to pretend it's there. Compensatory lengthening, we've already seen. A vowel that precedes what should be doubling lengthens in order to compensate for the fact that this isn't doubling. And harmonization, where you get both vowels in the article and the first root letter harmonizing to be the same thing. Well, I hope that isn't too bad. I don't know how to make it any simpler than this.
Dit is dus eentje om uit te printen en gewoon als je bij je map te doen. Hij is ook volgens mij beschikbaar. Even kijken, ik check even. Volgens mij staat hij gewoon in de folder. Hoofdstuk 6. Ja, dus het heet article before Greek letters, dus een PDF-file. Nou, we hebben nog eentje te doen. En dat is deze. Inseparable prepositions on definite nouns. Ben je er klaar voor?
Inseparable prepositions on definite nouns, part 2. We had a module entitled this in the past, and there we looked at what happens when you put le, be, or que, one of the inseparable prepositions, on a word that has a definite article ha. So let us review that. We'll look at the word sefer. This is an easy module compared to the last one. It's always nice. Sefer, book. So if we add ha to it, we have three parts, remember? We have the consonant, we have the vowel, patach, and we have gemination of the following letter, which is marked by the dagesh forte. Now what happens when we add le to it? Let us change color here. If you add le, be, or que, we'll take le as our example. The rule was simple. All you do is you replace the hey with the lamed. All the vowels are retained from the article, whatever was going on here before. So, let's rewrite this here. So, ha sefer becomes la sefer, and I'll just replace this here, the color again, to emphasize that the only thing we've changed is the consonant. Ha sefer becomes la sefer. The question now is, what happens when this first consonant, instead of a samech here, you have one of the weak letters, the gutturals, aleph, ayin, hey, chet, or reish, or the two coal mine letters that can give problems, the yud or the meh. Well, what happens is the very same thing. You do the same procedure. You simply replace the hey with the appropriate consonant from le, be, or que, and all the other features remain. So if you have implied doubling, then you'll still have implied doubling with the le, or compensatory lengthening, or just simple dropping of the dagesh, dagesh omitted, or harmonization. So let's look at a couple of examples. Look at the word ir, which means city. This was one of our examples previously, I think. Ir. So if we add the article, now this is a test from, or a review of the last module, what's going to happen? If we have ayin here with a yud, with a hidik under it, what's going to happen is we're going to get what? Compensatory lengthening. This is a weak guttural. Remember we had aleph, ayin, and reish. Those give compensatory lengthening, at least with this vowel, unless this was a comment. So this will lengthen, and of course we have no dagesh there. Let me get rid of this here. So what happens now when we put, let's say, le on there? We just replace this with this, so we get, and I'll change my color back to emphasize that nothing else is changing. Ha, or la, ir. Ha-ir becomes la-ir. The compensatory lengthening remains, even with the inseparable preposition. Let's take a look at another one.
Oh, even terug. Oké, dit is interessant. Dit kun je zien, hè. Hier is het woord dat begint met een ayin. Maar hetzelfde zou kunnen gelden als je met een alef begint. Mee eens? Ja? Dan ga ik even switchen. Nou, dat kan doen wat anders aan. Dit is Genesis 1 vers 4. Is het groot genoeg? Kun je het zien? Ja. Ja, is het te zien? Anders kan ik het nog iets groter maken. Hier zie je het woord haor. Ja? Dus je hebt oor Dat is met een alef. Dat is bijna hetzelfde als je net had, ier. Nou, dan krijg je het lidwoord ervoor. En normaal zou je dus het lidwoord is een he, een patag en een dagesh forte onder het eerstvolgende woord. Nou, die dagesh forte kan niet onder die alef, dus wat krijg je? Compensatory lengthening. Het wordt een kamets. Nou, dat klopt. Er staat hier een kamets. Haor. Het onder zie je het opnieuw. Haor. The light. Het licht. Als we nu naar het volgende vers gaan, en dat vind ik het interessante eraan. En nou snap ik het dus niet meer, want hier staat Vayikra Elohim Laor. Nou, wat hier dus gebeurt, is je hebt or, dat betekent licht. Daar komt eerst het bepaalde lidwoord voor. En dat wordt, en die punt die is er dan niet, hè, die verdwijnt. Dus dan krijg je compensatory lengthening, wordt het een kamets. Ha. Or. En dit zal waarschijnlijk, die alef zal zijn quiescent zijn. En als je er dan een lamet voor krijgt, dus als je dit dan plus le doet, dan krijg je de combinatie van inseparable preposition samen met een bepaald lidwoord. Dan verdwijnt de he en de schwa en de lamet neemt die plaats in. Dus dan krijg je dit. La, een quiescent alef. En dat staat er dan. Laor. Maar eigenlijk zou dat moeten zijn in the light. Nee, to the light. Sorry. To the light. En dit lidwoord, dat weet je omdat die lamet de plaats ingenomen heeft van die he. Maar dat staat hier niet. Hier ontbreekt het woordje to. In deze vertaling. In elke vertaling. En God noemde het licht. Maar dat staat er niet. Er staat niet haor, er staat laor. Dus er staat een inseparable preposition plus een definite article. Dus een onlosmakelijk voorzetsel met een bepaald lidwoord. Dat is verbonden met een zelfstandig naamwoord dat begint met een zwakke letter, de alef, die niet kan verdubbelen. En daar ontbreekt dus een lidwoord volgens mij. Ik weet niet hoe jullie daar tegenaan kijken.
Nee, ontbreekt niet het lidwoord, het breekt het voorzetsel.
Oh, het voorzetsel. Ja, gelijk. Ja, het voorzetsel.
Ja, je hebt gelijk.
En daar kwam ik dus achter toen ik de voorbereidingen deed voor de les, voor de conferentie voor de zomer. Daar zat ik over te piekeren van hoe kan dat nou? Wat gebeurt hier nou? En dat hielp dus met deze les. Van, ja, maar als je de les volgt die we net gedaan hebben, dan zou hier dus wat anders moeten staan.
De vertaling zou anders moeten zijn.
Ja, de vertaling zou anders moeten zijn. Want ik kan nog kijken of laor nog vaker voorkomt. Nee, dat...
Dat staat inderdaad in de Nederlandse vertaling ook niet.
Nee. Kijk, hier heb je laor, komt 7 keer voor. En hier zie je dus into the light. Zie je dat staan? En hier zie je to light. Of at dawn. Or with the light. En dat is logisch. Hier into the light. Laor. Want het is een samenvoeging van een voorzetsel, een lidwoord en een zelfstandig naamwoord. Hier wordt dan for light genoemd. En hier nog even. Bring me out, laor. Hier staat hij opnieuw. Out to the light. To light. Hier opnieuw. Kijk. De Zacharia. Of Zephania. Dus ik vind dat zo apart dat dan in de eerste vertaling, in de eerste keer, hier zo, bij Genesis 1, dat er dus alleen maar het licht staat, maar het zou eigenlijk in het licht. Je zou dus kunnen zeggen dat, wat noemt God nou licht of dag, wanneer je in het licht bent? Hij noemt dus niet het abstracte, het licht noemt hij niet dag, maar het feit dat je in het licht bent, wordt dag genoemd. En hier zie je hetzelfde, bij dit woord, Hachoshech is, hoe zeg je dat? Hachoshech is de duisternis, Lachoshech is in de duisternis en Velachoshech is en in de duisternis. Hier ontbreekt ook het voorzetsel, omdat hier la staat. Hetzelfde verhaal. Nou ja, dat vind ik dan boeiend als je dan helpt zo'n les als deze, helpt dus een beetje te van, hey, hier is iets aan de hand. Er is iets meer aan de hand dan je in eerste instantie zou denken als je alleen maar het woord, de tekst leest.
Preposition.
Snap je? Dus zo'n hele les als deze met die module, daardoor kwam ik erop van, hey, wat gebeurt hier nou eigenlijk met die tekst? Maar goed, dat vond ik interessant.
Let's take a look at another one. Let's look at Cherev. Cherev, that's supposed to be a bait there. Cherev means sword, and if we add the article to it, what's going to happen? This is a strong guttural, and it doesn't have the patak. Had the patak, we'd have an exception, but a strong guttural, so we're going to have virtual doubling, or implied doubling, which basically means the vowel stays the same, but no dagesh. And we're pretending that this is doubling even though we can't see it. Okay, so we got implied doubling there. We add, let's add k this time. Now remember, k and b have a dagesh lene in them. L doesn't. K and b do because they are begad kafat letters. So this here is a dagesh lene. But again, the same procedure. You just replace the hey with the k. So let's do that. So we have k. And it's just, let's replace that guy. Make a proper kaf. So k with the dagesh lene. This doesn't go. All we do is replace the consonant. And again, let's change our colors back to emphasize that nothing else is changing. This stays the same, and we have our implied doubling. Right? No dagesh there because it's implied doubling. Hacherev becomes kacherev. So in short, the rules are the same. Don't change anything except for the consonants when you add b, l, or k to a noun that has a definite article.
Ja. En nog even voor de duidelijkheid, voor het taalgevoel. Een definite noun is een bepaald zelfstandig naamwoord. Dat wil zeggen dat er een zelfstandig naamwoord is, plus het lidwoord. Een indefinite noun ook een i. Noun is een onbepaald zelfstandig naamwoord. Dit zou zijn de auto, bepaald. En dit is een auto. Als je het hebt over het licht, bepaald. En een licht, onbepaald. Een licht is dus or. En het licht is, dan moet ik even een plekje zoeken. Ha, compensatorie lengthening. Or. Dit betekent dus het licht. En dat is een licht. Dat is in het Hebreeuws zo. Als er lidwoord ontbreekt bij het zelfstandig naamwoord, is het onbepaald en kun je dus ook zeggen een onbepaald lidwoord. Hoppata. Nou, toch leuk die herhaling, hè? Pak je toch weer dingen op. Dit was de laatste les van hoofdstuk 6, volgens mij. Ja, dus volgende week beginnen we weer met het zelfstandig naamwoord. En de gender flips en zo. De dual en de sentences en coordinated conjunctions. Dus volgende week gaan we weer aan de slag. Gaan we weer verder eigenlijk waar we voor de zomer gebleven waren, hoofdstuk 7. Maar ik merk wel ook voor mijzelf dat het heel prettig is om dingen te herhalen. Want je bent toch al wat ouder, tenminste ik. en dat maakt dat je, om het weer echt op te pakken, je moet blijven herhalen en blijven herhalen. En als je van die jonge hersenen hebt zoals Jesse, dat giet erin en het blijft hangen. Maar ja, dat scheelt 40 jaar. Oké, nou, veel plezier allemaal. Tot de volgende week.
Ja, tot de volgende week. Dankjewel.
Doei doei.
Dankjewel.
Doei,
Dag
doei.
allemaal.
Dag.
Groetjes.